My name is Brianna Lewis. I was 32 years old, and I was sitting at my parents' dining table in Richmond, Virginia, when my dad set his fork down, looked straight at me, and said, "You have 48 hours to get your things out. This house is Autumn's now." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him, because we were all just passing the roasted chicken and green beans, my mom asking about one of my design clients, my sister scrolling on her phone like usual, and then his words came out like a verdict. My hand tightened around my glass because we all knew I was the one who had kept this old brick house standing when the bank almost took it 3 years ago, and yet he said it like I was some tenant whose lease had run out, not their daughter, who had sunk $60,000 and years of work into every corner of this place. If you're already feeling your blood pressure spike listening to this, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And honestly, I'm curious, if your parents tried to push you out of the home you saved for them, what would you do in my shoes? I remember staring at my dad across the table at the knot in his faded tie and the way his jaw was already set like the conversation was over. My mom kept her eyes glued to the mashed potatoes, pretending to adjust the serving spoon that didn't need adjusting, while my sister Autumn glanced up long enough to smirk like she'd just won something. My voice felt stuck, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because there was so much sitting in my chest. I knew if I opened my mouth, it would all come pouring out in one ugly wave. So I pressed my napkin onto my lap to stop my hands from shaking, and I thought about the new roof I'd paid for after the last storm, the refinished hardwood floors, the custom shelving I'd designed in the living room, the furniture I'd bought with my own money. All of it inside this house that he now said belonged to my sister, who hadn't lived here since she took off for New York 5 years earlier. I didn't argue. I just said, "Okay," stood up and walked down the hallway to my old bedroom, my heart pounding but my mind already lifting pieces like a blueprint, planning what the next 48 hours were going to look like for them and for me. The next morning, I woke up to the hum of traffic on the street and the faint sound of a train in the distance, the way it always sounded in this part of Richmond. I lay there staring at the ceiling I'd painted a soft gray-white 2 summers ago, trying to replay the dinner like maybe there'd been a different way to hear it, some context that would make it less brutal. There wasn't. The fact was, this house had been days away from foreclosure back in 2021, and it was my savings that stopped the bank from taking it. I was 29 then, just getting traction as an interior designer, doing side jobs on nights and weekends, hoarding every dollar, because my dream was to eventually buy my own place in the Fan District. When my parents admitted they were 60,000 behind and the bank was done being patient, I'd sat right in this same room and watched my mom cry into a napkin, while my dad kept saying, "We'll figure something out," but had absolutely no plan. Autumn didn't answer my calls that week. She was, as my mom always said, with a slightly dreamy voice, busy on Wall Street. I'd looked at the letter from the bank, at the number on the page, and at my parents, who weren't bad people in some cartoon villain way, just people who'd been careless for too long and assumed something or someone would bail them out. That someone turned out to be me. I wired the 60,000 from the account I'd been building since college, the one I thought would be my down payment one day, and I told myself I was investing in our family home, in stability, in something that mattered more than a condo with my name on the deed. The relief on their faces when the bank called back and said the foreclosure was off almost made it feel worth it. My mom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and my dad choked out, "We won't forget this, Bree," which at the time sounded like a promise, not foreshadowing. I didn't just save the house. I decided if we were keeping it, it needed to stop falling apart. So I took on bigger projects, worked through weekends, and turned this old place into something you'd actually see on one of those home makeover channels. The changes started small and practical. The washing machine first, because the old one had died, and we'd been dragging laundry to a grimy laundromat down the road. I put a new high-efficiency unit in the basement, paid for installation, and watched my mom act surprised every time she pushed the button, and it actually worked. Then came the kitchen new counters, a deep sink, updated fixtures I ordered, after a client paid an invoice I'd been anxiously refreshing my email for. In the living room, I bought a charcoal gray sectional, not fancy, but solid and comfortable, picked to handle Sunday football with my dad and my nephews, when autumn occasionally showed up for holidays. I added a simple media console and a mid-range flat-screen TV so my mom could watch her cooking shows without squinting at the ancient one we'd had since I was in middle school. I repainted the dining room walls, a warm cream, replaced the dated chandelier with something modern, but understated, and hung curtains that actually matched. Every decision was deliberate. I wanted my parents to feel like their home was worth being proud of. And if I was living here too, I wanted it to feel like an adult house, not a time capsule from the 90s. Meanwhile, Autumn's presence in this story was mostly through my parents' voices. She worked for some finance firm in Manhattan, depending on which neighbor my mom was talking to. She was either running deals or basically a vice president, even though Autumn herself never really gave details beyond vague references to the markets. She flew down maybe twice a year, breezing through with her designer suitcase and expensive boots, posting a few nostalgic porch photos on Instagram and then disappearing again on a Sunday evening flight. Every time she came, my parents lit up like the power company had flipped a main switch back on. My dad would pour her a drink, ask about her big deals, and listen like every word she said was proof they'd done something right as parents. I'd be in the kitchen cleaning up, standing on the floors I'd sanded myself, listening to Autumn talk about fancy rooftop bars, while my mom bragged about her city girl to anyone who would listen. If the conversation turned toward me at all, it was in passing. Bree does decorating stuff. My dad would say, not unkindly, just vaguely, like he didn't quite understand that my invoices paid their power bill. Last night's ultimatum made sense only in that warped context. Autumn had been home for a few days, her New York job apparently having downsized as my parents worded it carefully, and she'd been restless, stalking around the house on a video call with someone about a new opportunity in Charlotte that sounded more like a long shot than a sure thing. She'd made a few passing comments about how nice the house looked now, how it had good bones, and could probably get a lot on the market, and my mom had preened like the house's glow-up had just sort of happened, not like it was the result of me running to Home Depot in my spare time for years. When my dad told me last night that I had 2 days to leave because they were transferring ownership to Autumn, it wasn't out of nowhere. It was just the first time they'd said the selfish part out loud. I sat up in bed, swung my feet onto the rug I'd bought from a local shop in Carytown, and felt the first wave of anger settle into something more focused. If they thought I was going to drift out quietly and let my sister step into everything I'd built, they really didn't know me at all. The first person I called was not my parents, and it definitely wasn't Autumn. I dialed Jordan Patel, my best friend since college, and also the one person in my life who could hear a mess and instantly see the legal outline underneath. She picked up on the second ring, already sounding alert even though it was barely 9. "Okay, what happened?" she asked, skipping hello, because she probably heard the way I was breathing. I stood at the kitchen island I had personally picked out and installed, staring at the stainless steel sink, and told her about dinner, the 48-hour notice, the handoff of the house to Autumn, the way my mom wouldn't look at me. I reminded her of the $60,000 I'd paid 3 years ago, the remodels, the furniture. Jordan listened without interrupting the way she does when she's building a mental file. When I paused, she said, "That's not just messed up morally. Something smells off legally. Have you seen any paperwork? Have they refinanced? Taken out new loans?" I blinked because somehow in all my rage and hurt I hadn't even considered that angle. My parents were notoriously vague about money, and after I saved them, they'd gone right back to acting like finances were something that just sort of happened to them. "I haven't seen anything," I admitted. "Maybe you should," she said. "If they're rearranging ownership and you've put that much money in, I'd want to know exactly what's in your name." After we hung up, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Eli Gordon. He ran a branch of a regional bank downtown, and I'd met him 2 years earlier when I redesigned their lobby to feel less like a DMV waiting room and more like someplace people didn't dread walking into. I'd stayed late a few nights to make deadlines, and he'd joked that he owed me more than what the contract said. I decided to cash in on that joke now. When he picked up, I tried to keep my voice professional, even though my stomach was knotted. Eli, it's Brianna Lewis. I need a favor and I need you to be completely honest with me, I said. I summarized the situation, leaving out some of the emotional color, but hitting all the important beats. The earlier foreclosure scare, the 60,000 I'd wired my parents' sudden decision to give the house to my sister. Look, I said, I need to know if there are any loans, lines of credit, anything attached to my name that involve my parents or this address. He went quiet for a second and then said, "Give me a couple of hours. I'll see what I can find and I'll call you back. Email me your full info and the property address." I sent it immediately, then set my phone on the counter like it might explode if I held onto it. Waiting is its own kind of torture when your whole life might be shifting under your feet, so I didn't just sit there. I grabbed a notepad and started walking room by room, listing everything in the house I had personally bought. The gray sectional in the living room, the TV and console, the coffee table, the washable area rug, the dining table chairs, the modern light fixture, the curtains. In the hallway, the runner rug, the framed prints, the console table. In the kitchen, the stools, the island, like the dishes I'd bought when my mom finally admitted the old mismatched set made her embarrassed to have people over. In the basement, the washing machine. In my room, obviously, everything, including the built-in shelves I'd installed myself. I was halfway through writing entryway bench when my phone rang. Eli's name flashed on the screen and my throat went dry. "Okay," he started, voice slower than usual. "You were right to be suspicious. There's a home equity loan from 6 months ago. Amount is 60,000. The primary borrower on the paperwork is you, Brianna. Your parents and your sister are listed as co-borrowers." The words sounded scrambled at first and then they sharpened. "That's impossible," I said automatically, but it came out thin. "I haven't signed anything with them since the last time when I paid the bank directly." Eli sighed. "I figured you'd say that. I'm emailing you the signed agreement now. Take a look. And Brianna, if you didn't sign this, you need to talk to a lawyer." I opened my laptop and watched the email appear like a small bomb in my inbox. When the PDF loaded, I saw my name in big, bold letters, Brianna Lewis, followed by my address, my social security number, and then, at the bottom, a signature that looked eerily close to mine. The B dipped in the right place, but the loop on the R was wrong, and the way the final A trailed off looked like someone rushing copying from memory rather than muscle. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the pages, the house used as collateral, the loan amount, the payment schedule. 6 months of minimal payments, then missed ones. The address for notices was this house. My parents' names and Autumn's all there in neat official font like this had all been above board, like I'd sat down and cheerfully offered to tie my financial future to theirs again. I forwarded the document to Jordan with shaky fingers and typed, "They forged my signature." She called me almost before I hit send. "This is identity theft, Bree," she said, no preamble. "We're not just talking about hurt feelings anymore. This is criminal, and if they're trying to push you out now, it's because they know the situation's about to blow up. We need more proof, though. Anything at the house, letters, statements, copies. Check where they keep old paperwork. Attic closets, file drawers. Then bring everything to me." I knew exactly where to look. Our attic in this old Richmond house wasn't some cinematic, charming space. It was hot, dusty, and crammed with boxes dating back to my grandparents. I pulled the cord to drop the ladder, climbed up, and flicked on the single bulb that always took a second to warm up. Cardboard boxes sat in uneven stacks, some labeled in my mom's looping handwriting, taxes, Christmas bills, and others blank, just sagging a little with age. I hacked my way through dust and old wrapping paper until I found the box marked bills and dragged it toward the light. Inside were old power bills, water bills, insurance notices, most of them opened haphazardly and tossed in. Underneath a pile of envelopes, I found a plain manila folder with no label. That was the first thing that made my skin prickle. I opened it, and there it was, a printed copy of the same home equity loan agreement with that same wrong-looking signature on my line. Paper clipped to it was a letter from the bank dated last month, politely reminding them that their payment was overdue and that late fees were accruing. It didn't say fraud. It didn't say, "We know you forged your daughter's name." It just assumed I was part of this arrangement and had dropped the ball. I sat down hard on the wooden floor, the boards creaking under me, surrounded by dusty Christmas ornaments and my parents' secret. The timeline snapped into place, unpleasantly clean. 6 months ago, Autumn had come home for a long weekend that turned into almost 2 weeks. I'd been slammed with a hotel lobby redesign and barely around, but I remembered my parents taking her out to dinner on Broad Street, talking in hushed tones about her big plans and how this could really set her up. At the time, I thought it was just more wishful thinking. Now I realized that was probably when they went to the bank together, armed with my personal information that only they had, telling some story about me being too busy to come in and sign in person. They'd counted on the fact that I trusted them, that I wouldn't randomly pull credit reports for fun, that I wouldn't dig through the attic unless something pushed me. And then, last night, my dad had the nerve to act like I was the freeloader. There was a sharp, almost metallic taste in my mouth as I collected every paper that mentioned the loan, the letter, the agreement, and tucked them into a reusable shopping bag. Whatever this was, it was bigger than a family argument. Jordan was right. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a crime they were hoping I'd swallow quietly. By the time I climbed back down from the attic, dust in my hair and my shirt sticking to my back from the heat, something in me had clicked over from hurt to logistics. They wanted me out in 2 days. Fine. I would leave, just not the way they imagined. I spread my notepad out on the dining room table and finished cataloging every major thing I'd bought. Next to each item, I jotted down approximate purchase dates and where the receipts likely were: email folders, a file box in my closet, my accounting app. Those would be easy to pull later. Then I grabbed my phone, searched movers Richmond same day, and scrolled until I found a local company with decent reviews and a note that they could usually handle last-minute jobs. When the dispatcher picked up, I sounded calmer than I felt. "Hi, my name is Brianna Lewis. I need to move several large pieces of furniture and appliances out of a house here in Richmond this afternoon, if possible," I said. I rattled off the list: sectional TV and stand dining chairs, washer, assorted smaller pieces. He asked, "Is there an elevator or just stairs?" And I flashed a mental image of the narrow staircase. "Just stairs," I said. He gave me a window between 2 and 3 p.m., took the address, and confirmed. When I hung up, I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. Taking back what belonged to me wasn't just symbolic, it was survival. Around late morning, the doorbell rang, and I half expected it to be one of my parents storming in early, but when I opened the door, it was Denise Palmer, our neighbor from 3 houses down. She stood there with a Tupperware container of banana bread and that look older Southern women get when they've clearly been thinking about something and finally decide to just ask. "Hey, honey," she said, stepping inside when I moved aside. "You looked upset when you got out of your car last night. Everything all right?" Denise had seen me painting the porch last summer, had offered iced tea when I hauled in the washing machine, had been the one to comment, laughing, that I was the only contractor this block needs. I hesitated, because there's always that instinct to keep family business private, but after what I'd just found in the attic, the idea of protecting my parents' image made me feel a little sick. So I told her the shorter version: my dad's deadline, the house supposedly going to Autumn despite my investment, the way they'd framed it, like I was being unreasonable for even looking surprised. Denise's mouth tightened. "I've watched you pour yourself into this place, Brianna," she said quietly. "Your daddy's talked a big game about Autumn's job up north, but far as I can see, you're the one who's been here every weekend painting and hauling and fixing. Don't you let them rewrite that story." Her words landed like a hand on my back, steadying me. I didn't tell her about the forged loan yet, but I knew there was a reason she'd stopped by, and part of me suspected it wouldn't be the last time she'd end up involved. After Denise left promising to be around if you need anything, even just to sit and breathe, I texted Jordan a photo of the attic documents and told her I was pulling my things out that afternoon. She called immediately. "Good. You're not obligated to leave thousands of dollars of your property for the people who just used your name without permission," she said. She started outlining what would come next, reporting the fraud to the bank, formally putting alerts on my credit, and yes, filing a civil suit. "We're going to need every scrap of proof," she said. "The agreement, the bank letter receipts for what you put into the house, and anything showing you saved them from foreclosure." I said I have the original foreclosure notice somewhere, and she made a pleased noise. "Perfect. Also start thinking about where you'll stay once your stuff is out. You don't have to be in that house when they figure out what you've done. Come stay with me a few nights if you want. We'll turn my living room into War Room Central." The idea of sitting on Jordan's lumpy couch surrounded by legal pads and pizza boxes sounded strangely comforting. I told her I'd be over after the movers finished. The moving truck pulled up around 2:30, the rumble of its engine echoing down the quiet street of old brick houses and tall oaks. 3 guys in navy t-shirts hopped out, introduced themselves, and looked around the nicely kept front yard. "What are we taking?" one asked, glancing at the porch swing I'd hung last spring. I walked them through the house, pointing to items I'd tagged with neon sticky notes: the sectional TV media console dining chairs, the washer rugs, my bedroom furniture, the entryway bench. "Everything with a sticky note goes," I said. "Walls, built-ins, and light fixtures stay." I'd thought about ripping out the fixtures I'd bought, but the hassle and potential damage didn't seem worth it. Besides, the empty sockets would probably be more dramatic, and I wasn't interested in sabotaging the house just in not funding my sister's new life. As they carefully lifted the TV off the mount and wrapped the couch in blankets, I felt a weird mix of grief and satisfaction. The rooms I'd spent years making beautiful were stripping down in a matter of hours, but each item rolling out the front door was one more thing I wouldn't have to see Autumn lounging on later like it had magically appeared there. While the movers were working, I went back to my email, downloading receipts into a folder labeled House Evidence. Sofa, TV, washer, hardware store orders, even the paint receipts, they all went in. I printed a few key ones on my home printer just in case, and tucked them in the bag with the loan documents. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "We're at your aunt's. Don't do anything crazy. We'll talk tonight." I stared at it, then locked my phone without responding. Crazy in her mind probably meant having boundaries or not agreeing to be financially ruined quietly. Around 4 o'clock, the movers were loading the last of my boxes. The living room looked hollow, no sectional, no curtains, no pictures, just bare cream walls and the faint outlines where the rug had protected the floor from sun fading. Standing there, I realized how much of this house's warmth had come from my contribution, not from some inherent charm. When I signed the paperwork with the movers and gave them the address of the storage unit I'd rented that morning, one of them said, "You sure you're okay being here alone with it like this?" I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "I'll be gone soon too," I said. "This place just doesn't know it yet." They had barely pulled away when the front door opened without a knock, like it always had for family. Autumn stepped into the empty living room in jeans and a blazer that still looked very New York next to the scuffed hardwood. She dropped her weekender bag with a dull thud and spun around, eyes widening as she took in the bare walls and vacant floor. "What did you do?" she demanded, voice pitching up. "Brianna, what is this? Where's the furniture?" I leaned against the doorway to the hall, my bag of documents at my feet, and met her outrage, calmly. "I moved my things out," I said. "The sectional, the TV, The washer, those curtains you liked so much. Those were mine. I bought them. Since this is supposedly your house now, I figured you'd want to furnish it yourself. Her face flushed. Dad said this was my place now. You can't just strip it, she snapped. Do you know how this looks? What am I supposed to do, sit on the floor? I shrugged. Maybe start with a budget and a plan. That's what I did. Her eyes narrowed, and for a second I saw a flicker of uncertainty. You're being petty, she said. This is why Mom and Dad didn't want to talk to you about the transfer. You're always so dramatic. I bent down, unzipped my bag, and pulled out the printed copy of the home equity loan agreement, the one with my forged signature. You know what's dramatic? I said, holding it up. Taking out a $60,000 loan against this house using my name and social security number without telling me, then trying to kick me out before the whole thing collapses. That feels pretty dramatic to me. For the first time since she'd walked in, Autumn's expression faltered. Her gaze flicked to the paper and then back to my face. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but it lacked her earlier certainty. We all agreed. I didn't agree. I cut in. I never signed this. I didn't go to the bank with you. And my friend who works there sent me the digital copy, so I've seen exactly what's in their system. I've also seen the overdue notice they mailed here. Autumn's posture shifted, a faint defensiveness settling into her shoulders. We needed that loan, she said finally. You don't understand. I had an opportunity and the timing was bad, and Mom and Dad. So you and Mom and Dad solved it by pretending I was part of it. I asked. You had options. You could have asked me. You could have dealt with your own risk. Instead, you all decided I was the easiest path. Again. Before she could answer, a firm knock sounded at the open front door, and Nick Warren, our neighbor from the corner, stepped inside. Nick was in his late 50s, wore button-down shirts even on Saturdays, and volunteered at the local community center. Everything okay here? He asked, eyes moving from Autumn's flushed face to the empty room. I saw the moving truck earlier, and Denise mentioned you were going through something. I straightened. We're just having a family discussion, I said, but my tone made it clear whose side I was on. Autumn rolled her eyes. This doesn't concern you, Nick, she snapped. We're fine. Nick didn't back off. He looked around slowly, taking in the emptiness that echoed every word. I've watched Brianna fix this place up for years, he said, voice calm. Hauling paint, carrying in that big couch by herself with the delivery guys installing that TV. Seems to me she's got a right to take what's hers if she's leaving. Autumn's jaw clenched. You're all obsessed with what she did, she said. She just decorated. I'm the one with the real career. Mom and Dad know that. The insult didn't sting like it once would have. It just sounded tired. I held the loan agreement up so Nick could see the header, the bank's logo, my name. They also know they signed my name to this without asking, I said. A home equity loan they used to chase one of Autumn's real career Hail Mary passes. The bank thinks I'm the one responsible. Nick frowned, lines deepening around his mouth. That's not just bad manners, he said softly. That's illegal. Autumn shot him a look. You don't know everything, she said. You're making her sound like a victim, and she loves that. She lives for this drama. Something in me snapped at that, not in a screaming way, but in a cold clarity kind of way. If I lived for drama, I would have rung every doorbell on this block 3 years ago and told everyone exactly how much I paid to keep Mom and Dad from being evicted, I said evenly. I didn't. I kept my mouth shut. I kept paying for things. I kept showing up. You all counted on me continuing to be that quiet. I folded the loan document and slid it back into my bag. Those days are over. Autumn's phone started buzzing in her hand, and she glanced at the screen. It's Dad, she muttered, jabbing at the answer button. Yeah, she took everything. The house is empty, she said into the phone, pacing across the bare floorboards. I listened to her describe the missing furniture like it was a crime scene, not me reclaiming my property. No, she's still here, she added, shooting me a nasty look. She's waving around some paper and claiming we did something illegal. I could practically hear my dad's voice through the tinny speaker, low and angry. Nick stepped a little closer to me, not in a threatening way, just solidly present. "Whatever they say," he murmured. "Remember, you're not crazy. They're just mad they got caught." I nodded, appreciating that he didn't try to make it bigger than it was. He just named it. Autumn hung up sharply and pointed at me. "Dad says you're overreacting," she said. "He says if you go through with whatever this is, you're done with this family. You'll regret it." I picked up my bag and my car keys from the console table, one of the last things that was still mine in the house. "I already regret trusting you all with my name," I said. "The rest is just consequences." I didn't wait for her to answer. I walked past her out the front door and locked it behind me, sliding the key into my pocket for the last time. Nick followed me onto the porch. "You need anything tonight?" he asked. "Ride place to stash something?" "Anything," I shook my head. "I'm heading to Jordan's," I said. "We're going to figure out the legal side." He nodded approvingly. "Good. And Brianna?" I paused. "Yeah, you did the right thing," he said simply. "People around here have eyes. We've seen who's been doing the work." His words stayed with me all the way across town to Jordan's apartment near the river, cutting through the part of my brain that still wanted to say, maybe I was being too harsh. When I got to Jordan's, we cleared her coffee table, spread out the loan documents, the bank letter, the receipts, and she opened her laptop, switching from friend mode to lawyer mode, with a seriousness I'd only seen her use in court stories before. "Okay," she said, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Let's build this case." We spent that evening turning my pain into paragraphs and exhibits. Jordan drafted a timeline starting with the original foreclosure threat dates, amounts, the wire transfer receipts I dug out of my email, and then moving into the improvements I'd made, backed by invoices and photos. Next came the forged loan screenshots from Eli's email, the scanned agreement, the envelope from the attic with the bank's return address. "We're going to sue them for fraud, unauthorized use of your identity, and seek damages for emotional distress," she said, her tone matter of fact. "We're also going to notify the bank officially that the primary borrower's signature was forged, so they can start their own internal process." It felt surreal hearing my parents and sister described in those terms, not just as mom, dad, Autumn, but as parties in a lawsuit. Still, the more we worked, the more it felt like I was finally doing something that matched the scale of what they'd done. I signed a retainer agreement as her client, not just her friend, and when we finally printed the complaint, it was almost 20 pages long, full of words like willful, negligent, and misrepresentation. Jordan slid it across the table to me with a pen. "You ready?" she asked. My hand hovered for a second. Then I signed. The signature was mine this time, slow, deliberate, and absolutely real. The next morning, we drove to the courthouse downtown, that squat brick building I'd passed 100 times without really seeing. Jordan carried the thick stack of documents in a slim briefcase. I clutched my bag like a life raft. We went through security, rode the elevator, and finally stood at the clerk's window while she stamped each copy with a heavy thunk that sounded more final than any family conversation I'd ever had. When it was done, Jordan handed me the filed copy. "You just sued your parents and your sister," she said gently. "That's a big thing. How do you feel?" I stepped outside into the clear, cold air and looked at the James River rolling in the distance. The emotions were layered: sadness, anger, relief. But over all of it, there was a sense of having finally stepped out from under something heavy. Like I stopped pretending they didn't already choose this path, I said. "I didn't make them forge my name. I'm just refusing to carry it for them." Jordan smiled a little, the corners of her eyes softening. "Exactly," she said. "Now we get to see how they handle being held accountable." The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and that low-level anxiety that hums in the background when your life is in litigation, but there were also moments of surprising strength. Eli wrote a detailed email confirming the process of the loan application and how unusual it was for a primary borrower not to be present, which Jordan used to draft questions for him in case he needed to testify. Denise agreed to write a statement about how she watched me do the physical work on the house and how my parents had bragged about Autumn while I was the one actually maintaining things. She came over one evening with reading glasses and a determined look, signed the affidavit Jordan had prepared, and squeezed my hand. "They may not appreciate you," she said, "but a judge will understand facts." Nick added his own statement about the moving day and about his long-term observations of who showed up and who just showed off. Serving my parents and Autumn with the lawsuit was messy. There were angry calls and voicemails I didn't answer, but logistically it happened. After that, there was nothing to do but keep living and wait for dates to be set. I moved into a small apartment in Scott's Addition, a one-bedroom with exposed brick and big windows that looked out over a jumble of breweries and warehouses. At first, it felt like camping in a storage unit because my things were still in boxes from the quick move, but gradually I started putting the pieces back together. The gray sectional fit perfectly against one wall, the TV hung neatly on the opposite, and my dining chairs surrounded a thrifted table that I refinished on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Each item looked different in this new space, less like parts of my parents' house, and more like the beginnings of my own life. I picked out new curtains navy this time, not cream, and when I hung them, I realized I'd subconsciously avoided anything that reminded me of the old dining room. There was something quietly powerful about loading a washing machine in an apartment where no one else had a key, where every bill had my name on it because I chose it, not because someone stole it. Eventually, the court date arrived. Walking into that courtroom with Jordan at my side felt like stepping onto a stage I never wanted to audition for, but there I was. My parents sat at the opposite table with a local lawyer who looked tired and slightly annoyed to even be there. My mom's eyes were puffy, and she glanced at me once quickly, then away. My dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched in that same hard line as the night of the ultimatum. Autumn sat next to them, arms folded in a blazer that looked more off-brand than usual, her confidence dimmer than I'd ever seen it. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone, called the case. Jordan laid everything out: the original foreclosure, my $60,000 payment, the renovations and furnishings I'd funded, the sudden home equity loan with my forged signature, and the subsequent attempt to push me out. Eli testified briefly by phone about bank procedures and how unusual the paperwork seemed. Denise's affidavit was read into the record. It was all straightforward, unemotional on the surface, but I could feel the weight of every detail. My parents' lawyer tried to spin it as a family misunderstanding, suggesting that I had verbally agreed to let them use my name for the loan and was now having second thoughts. When the judge asked why I wasn't present when supposedly agreeing to this major financial obligation, he mumbled something about scheduling conflicts. She didn't look impressed. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled at first, but it steadied as I described the moment I saw my forged signature, the feeling of realizing my own parents had used information I'd only ever given them in trust. I didn't embellish. I didn't have to. The facts were ugly enough. When the judge gave her ruling, it was firm and clear. The loan, she said, was void as to me given the evidence of forgery and lack of consent. She ordered that my name be removed from all associated documents and that the bank be notified that enforcement should be pursued only against the remaining borrowers. She also granted damages for emotional distress and my legal fees to be paid by my parents and Autumn. And because the loan was delinquent, she noted that the bank would likely move to foreclose on the property unless they found another solution, which, given their resources, seemed unlikely. I didn't stay to study my parents' faces as the implications sank in, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught my mom's hand fly to her mouth and my dad's shoulders slump in a way I'd never seen before. Autumn stared straight ahead, looking for once like someone who realized her actions had real-world consequences, not just annoyed coworkers or an awkward holiday. Outside, Jordan clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You're free of their mess now," she said. legally at least. I leaned back against the brick wall of the courthouse and took a long, shaky breath. I didn't want it to end like this, I said. I just wanted them to not use me. She nodded. Most people don't want their family in a courtroom, she said. But sometimes that's the only place anyone listens. News in a city like Richmond travels faster than you'd think. Within a few months, I heard through Denise and Nick, and then just through the natural gossip that passes from neighbor to barbershop to grocery store, that the bank had followed through on foreclosure. The house I'd grown up in, the one I'd saved and then remade, went up for auction. It sold for just enough to cover the outstanding loan and fees. My parents moved into a cramped rental on the outskirts of town, a beige duplex with thin walls and no porch to paint. Autumn moved in with them for a while, then bounced between there and a roommate situation closer to downtown when she finally landed a job at a car dealership selling SUVs instead of stocks. It wasn't glamorous and she hated it, but suddenly her network didn't have much to offer. The same neighbors who used to coo over my mom's stories about our girl in New York now gave tight, polite smiles when they saw her at the supermarket because forgery and eviction threats don't play well in community memory. The voicemail started the day after the court ruling. First, my mom, her voice thin and wobbly. "Brianna, I don't understand how you could do this to us," she said. "We're your parents. Families work things out. We're going to lose the house, and it's going to be because you dragged everything into court." Then my dad, angrier. "You didn't have to go that far," he said. "We were going to figure it out. You've ruined us. I hope you're happy." Autumn's messages vacillated between rage and self-pity. "You think you're better than us," she said in one. "You always wanted to be the hero? Well, congratulations. You got what you wanted. Don't come crawling back when you realize you messed up." I listened to each one once, my chest tight, then blocked their numbers and deleted all the recordings. I wasn't going to archive their manipulation like some twisted family scrapbook. Jordan reminded me gently but firmly that I didn't owe them access to my head or heart anymore, just because we shared DNA. Life in my little Richmond apartment slowly shifted from temporary to real. I picked up more clients, some of them referred by people who'd heard pieces of my story and quietly admired that I'd stood up for myself. A cafe owner in Church Hill hired me to redo his space, saying, "I want someone who knows how to hold their own." A small law office asked me to redesign their reception area after Jordan recommended me, and the partner joked that if I could survive a family fraud case, dealing with attorneys would be easy. Financially, things stabilized. The damages from the lawsuit helped me pay off the last of my own student loans and put a cushion back into savings. I still didn't have a house of my own, but for the first time, the money I saved actually belonged to me, unencumbered by someone else's bad decisions. I'd sit on my sectional in the evening's, laptop open, sketching new layouts, and sometimes I'd glance at the washing machine humming in the closet and feel an almost ridiculous surge of satisfaction that it was washing only my clothes in the home I chose. Every now and then I'd run into someone who knew my parents, at the farmer's market, at a hardware store, outside a cafe. Some were awkward, some were openly curious, a few were supportive. Denise and Nick were firmly in the last category. They came by my apartment once with a housewarming plant and stories from the old neighborhood. "People know what really happened," Denise said, sipping coffee at my tiny table. "They may not know every legal term, but they know whose back was bent from carrying that house." Nick nodded. "Your folks are having a hard time," he said, not unkindly. "But that's the weight of their choices, not yours. You offered them a way out 3 years ago, and they used it to dig a deeper hole." Hearing that from people who weren't personally entangled made it easier to tamp down the guilt that still flared up sometimes late at night when I thought about my mom sitting in that cramped duplex. I could feel compassion for where they ended up without pretending I'd put them there. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I walked along the riverfront path, the air humid but soft, and thought about the arc of the last year. I'd gone from being the daughter who fixed everything quietly, who constantly rearranged her own life to plug the gaps in everyone else's, to someone who had drawn a hard line and stuck to it even when it meant losing the illusion of a normal family. I didn't pretend it hadn't cost me anything. Holidays were smaller now. There were no more random text updates from my mom about what she was cooking for Sunday dinner. No more last-minute calls from my dad asking if I could look over something that always turned out to be a bill. But the trade-off was a life where I woke up in a space I'd chosen, working a job I loved, with friendships that weren't built on what I could do for someone financially. I felt my shoulders relax in a way they hadn't in years. Independence, I realized, wasn't just about living alone. It was about knowing where you end and other people begin and refusing to let them move that line without your consent. I haven't reconciled with my parents or with Autumn. They know how to reach Jordan if they ever decide to genuinely acknowledge what they did, instead of just being angry about the fallout. But until that happens, my phone will stay quiet where they're concerned. The last I heard, they were still in that rental, still juggling bills, still trying to adjust to a life where there wasn't a daughter to quietly sand down their rough edges and write checks from an account they didn't own. Sometimes I feel a pang of sadness thinking about the old house, about the porch I painted and the dining room I made glow, now belonging to strangers. But then I come home to my apartment, see the way the afternoon light hits the navy curtains, the way the sectional fits just right, and I remember that I was never going to be truly at peace in a place where my worth was measured only by what I could give, and how quietly I gave it. So that's where I am now. I'm Brianna, 32, an interior designer in Richmond, who finally stopped letting family be an excuse for being used. I learned the hard way that love without respect isn't enough, and that someone can be your parent or your sibling and still cross lines that require real consequences. If there's anything I want you to take from my story, it's this: don't hand over your name, your savings, or your sanity just because you share a last name with someone. Ask questions, read the paperwork, set boundaries, and mean them even if it makes people angry. The fallout might hurt, but living under constant quiet exploitation hurts more in the long run. That's my story and the lesson I learned about family trust and finally choosing myself. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were in my place, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it.